During my wife's final prenatal checkup, the doctor started shaking while staring at the ultrasound. He pulled me aside and said, "Leave this hospital now and file for divorce." I asked what he meant, but he said, "There's no time to explain. You'll understand when you see this." After looking at the screen, I never went back home again. I thought I had it all, a thriving business, a beautiful family. But one doctor's appointment, one seemingly innocent checkup, ripped the mask off everything, revealing a betrayal so deep, it still sends shivers down my spine. My perfect life wasn't just built on sand, it was a skyscraper balanced on a single, shocking lie, and I was about to watch it all crumble. My name is Jared Atkinson, and for 38 years, I'd built my life like I built houses, with precision, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. I owned the most successful construction company in Cedar Falls, employing over 200 people, handling projects across 3 states. These hands. They tell the story of a man who started with nothing, working his way up from a day laborer to a millionaire contractor. 15 years ago, I married Angela Moody. She was the town's catch, beautiful, ambitious, from a family with old money that had long since dried up. The Moody name still carried weight, but the bank accounts? Empty for generations. To outsiders, our marriage seemed perfect. Angela played the part of the successful businessman's wife flawlessly, organizing charity events, maintaining our sprawling estate. But I started to notice things over the years. A coldness crept into her touch. She'd disappear for hours without explanation. Expensive purchases that didn't match any occasion. Our son, Trevor, was 14, and he was the light of my life. He'd inherited my work ethic and Angela's intelligence, excelling in everything. I coached his baseball team. We spent every weekend in the garage, building things, a tradition Angela had stopped participating in years ago. The pregnancy, 6 months prior, had been a surprise. After 14 years of marriage and multiple miscarriages, we'd assumed Trevor would be our only child. I was thrilled by the news. Angela. She seemed distant, anxious. Dr. Edmund Harrington, our family doctor for over a decade, was a man in his 60s with kind eyes. He'd monitored Angela's pregnancy closely. As I sat in his waiting room, I couldn't help but notice how different this pregnancy felt. With Trevor, Angela had glowed, excited about every milestone. This time, she seemed burdened, often staring off into space with a worried expression she'd just blame on hormones. Chuck Lake, my business partner and best friend since high school, had noticed it too. "Something's not right with her, man," he'd told me just last week over our Friday beer. My wife, Sarah, saw her at the coffee shop, deep in conversation with some guy. When Sarah waved, Angela practically jumped out of her skin. I'd brushed it off then, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Angela's behavior had grown increasingly erratic. Coming home late from shopping trips with no bags. Taking phone calls in private. Showing almost no interest in preparing for the baby's arrival. That morning, she'd been unusually quiet. Barely touched her breakfast. She seemed nervous, constantly checking her reflection. When I suggested we grab lunch after the appointment to celebrate our healthy baby, she just nodded, without enthusiasm. As I waited for her, my gut, that same gut that had built my empire, was screaming that my perfectly constructed life was about to shatter. Angela lay on the examination table, her shirt pulled up to expose her rounded belly. The gel felt cold against her skin, but not as cold as the fear running through her veins. She'd been dreading this appointment, knowing that modern ultrasound technology would reveal what she'd been desperately trying to hide. The affair had started innocently enough, 8 months ago. Marcos Jennings. A smooth-talking real estate developer from the state capital. 32, dark hair, a charming smile that snagged Angela's attention at a charity fundraiser. Unlike Jared, who was always covered in construction dust, talking about building codes and job sites, Marcos wore expensive suits. He spoke of international investments, luxury developments. She felt trapped in Cedar Falls, suffocating. While Jared built his empire in our small town, she'd always dreamed of something bigger. City life. Sophisticated social circles. The kind of wealth that bought respect, rather than earned it through calloused hands and honest work. Marcos pursued her relentlessly. Expensive flowers arrived when Jared was at work. Text messages filled with poetry, promises of a life beyond Cedar Falls. He rented a luxury suite at the Grand View Hotel, 40 minutes outside town. Twice a week, they'd meet there for passionate encounters that made Angela feel alive again, in ways she'd forgotten. The pregnancy. An accident. One reckless night. One moment of carelessness where passion overruled common sense. By the time Angela realized what had happened, it was too late for the quiet solution she'd initially considered. The timeline was wrong. Dangerously wrong. She'd been with Marcos 3 weeks before the last time she'd been intimate with Jared. Dr. Harrington moved the ultrasound wand across her belly. His expression grew troubled. Angela couldn't see the screen, but she watched his face, carefully, noting how his eyebrows furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Is everything all right?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The doctor didn't answer immediately. He was calculating dates, cross-referencing the baby's development with the timeline Angela had provided months ago. The measurements were off. Significantly off. This baby was conceived at least 3 weeks earlier than she'd claimed. In his 40 years of practice, Dr. Harrington had seen this situation before. Awkward silences. Nervous wives. Trusting husbands, sitting in waiting rooms with excited smiles. But never with people he'd known for decades. People whose lives would be shattered by what the ultrasound revealed. Meanwhile, I sat in the waiting room, scrolling through emails from job sites. Atkinson Construction was in the middle of our biggest project yet, a luxury hotel complex. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was building the very type of establishment where my wife was betraying me. Chuck had texted me earlier about a potential investor for our next big project. Someone named Marcos Jennings, asking about our company. I made a mental note to look into it later. Trevor was at school, probably thinking about the baby's sister or brother he'd been eagerly anticipating. He'd already started converting the spare room into a nursery, painting cartoon characters on the walls with the same attention to detail he applied to everything else. I smiled, thinking about his excitement, completely unaware that his world was about to be shattered along with my own. Dr. Harrington finally set down the wand, turning to Angela with grave eyes. "Mrs. Atkinson, we need to discuss the timeline. Based on the baby's development, conception occurred approximately 26 weeks ago. Not 23, as we originally calculated." Angela's face went pale. 3 weeks. The difference that would destroy everything she'd built over 15 years of marriage. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I need to speak with your husband," Dr. Harrington said quietly. "This affects both of you. He deserves to know the truth." As the doctor left to get me, Angela closed her eyes, trying to prepare for the end of the world as she knew it. Somewhere across town, Marcos Jennings was probably closing another real estate deal, oblivious to the fact that his secret was about to destroy multiple lives. And in that waiting room, the man who'd loved and trusted her for 15 years was about to learn that his perfect life had been built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated lies. Dr. Harrington's hands were trembling slightly as he approached the waiting room. 40 years in medicine, he delivered difficult news countless times, but never had the stakes felt so personal. My family had been his patients since Trevor was born. I'd even built the addition to his clinic just 5 years ago. This wasn't just about medical ethics, it was about watching a good man's world collapse. "Mr. Atkinson, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Dr. Harrington's voice was carefully controlled, but I immediately noticed the tension. We walked to his office, leaving Angela alone in the examination room. He closed the door and gestured for me to sit, but remained standing himself, pacing slightly as he gathered his thoughts. "Jared, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but you need to know the truth." He paused, looking at the man he'd known for years. "The ultrasound shows that the baby's development is inconsistent with the timeline your wife provided. Based on the measurements, conception occurred approximately 26 weeks ago, not 23. My brow furrowed as I processed the information. "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means the child couldn't have been conceived during the time frame when you and Angela were together. According to your wife's medical history and our previous discussions, you were away on that construction project in Denver during the conception window." The color drained from my face as the implications hit me like a physical blow. The Denver project. I'd been there for 3 weeks in January. The biggest contract Atkinson Construction had ever landed. I'd called Angela every night, missing her terribly, looking forward to coming home to celebrate our success. "Are you absolutely certain?" My voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Harrington nodded gravely. "I've triple-checked the measurements. There's no doubt about the timing." I stood up slowly, my mind racing through the past 6 months. Angela's strange behavior. The secret phone calls. The distance between us. It all made perfect sense now. I thought about Trevor, probably sitting in algebra class, excited about becoming a big brother to a child that wasn't even his sibling. "What do I do now?" I asked, more to myself than to the doctor. "That's not for me to say," Dr. Harrington replied. "But Jared, you're a good man. You deserve better than this." Whatever you decide to do, you need to protect yourself and Trevor. As we walked back toward the examination room, his advice echoed in my ears. Leave this hospital now and file for divorce. The words had come out before he could stop them, spoken from the heart of a man who'd watched too many good people suffer from betrayal. But Jared Atkinson was not a man who made rash decisions. As we approached the door, I was already calculating. Planning. Angela was still lying on the examination table, staring at the ceiling, tears in her eyes. She knew. She'd known all along. Show me, I said to Dr. Harrington. Show me the ultrasound. He hesitated, then turned the monitor toward me. There on the screen was undeniable proof. Development measurements that corresponded to a conception date that made Angela's betrayal crystal clear. The baby was healthy and growing normally. But it wasn't mine. Angela finally looked at me, her eyes filled with tears and desperation. Jared, I can explain. No, I said quietly, my voice carrying a coldness she'd never heard before. You can't. I studied the ultrasound for another moment, memorizing every detail. Then I looked at my wife, the woman I'd loved and trusted for 15 years. The mother of my son. The person who had just destroyed everything I believed about my life. We're going home, I said, my voice eerily calm. We're going to have a conversation, and then you're going to tell me exactly who he is. Angela's face went white. Jared, please. Dr. Harrington, I interrupted, turning to the older man. Thank you for telling me the truth. Send me copies of everything. The ultrasound, the measurements, the timeline. Everything. As we left the hospital, Angela tried repeatedly to speak, but I remained silent. My mind was no longer focused on the betrayal itself. I'd already processed and accepted that reality. Instead, I was thinking about the future. About Trevor's stability. About my business. About the fact that somewhere in Cedar Falls, a man was walking around thinking he'd gotten away with destroying the Atkinson family. I'd built an empire through careful planning and methodical execution. I'd learned early in life that the key to success wasn't just working hard, it was working smart. As we drove home in silence, Angela crying softly in the passenger seat, I was already formulating a plan. A plan that would ensure justice was served in ways the legal system never could. The man who'd spent 15 years building a life was about to spend however long it took tearing down the lives of those who'd betrayed him. And unlike my construction projects, this demolition would be personal. Permanent. And absolutely devastating. That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by awards and photographs that now felt like elaborate lies. Angela had retreated to our bedroom, claiming a headache, while Trevor worked on homework, blissfully unaware that his world had shifted off its axis. I opened my laptop and began what I did best, methodical research and planning. My first search was for Marcos Jennings. It didn't take long to find information about Cedar Falls' newest predator. Jennings Development Group had a sleek website showcasing luxury properties. Marcos was featured prominently, the charismatic CEO who brings dreams to life through visionary real estate development. The man was handsome in a polished way that I found immediately repulsive. All white teeth and expensive suits. The kind of person who'd never worked an honest day in his life. Marcos's LinkedIn profile showed him at the same charity fundraiser where he'd likely met Angela. His social media presence revealed a man who thrived on attention and luxury. Digging deeper, I discovered he was married to a woman named Samantha Jennings, a prominent attorney in the state capitol. They had twin daughters, aged 10, and lived in a $1 million home in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me. This man was destroying multiple families simultaneously. Over the next week, I maintained my normal routine while secretly gathering intelligence. I told Chuck that Angela was having pregnancy complications that required rest, which explained her absence from social events and my own distracted demeanor. Chuck, ever loyal, handled extra responsibilities without question. I hired a private investigator named Paul Hines, a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. Paul was discreet and thorough, exactly what I needed. Within 3 days, Paul had documented Angela and Marcos's weekly meetings at the Grand View Hotel, complete with photographs and timestamps that painted a picture of calculated deception. The evidence was damning. Angela had been using money from our joint account to pay for the hotel room. She told me she was shopping or visiting her sister Muriel in the next town over, but instead, she was 40 minutes away in a luxury suite, playing house with a man who was lying to his own family just as thoroughly. But I wanted more than just evidence of the affair. I wanted to understand the full scope of the betrayal and ensure my response would be comprehensive and permanent. Through Paul's investigation, I learned that Marcos had been planning to leave his wife and move Angela to the state capital, where they'd start fresh with their child and Angela's settlement from the divorce. The plan revealed Angela's complete betrayal. She hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been planning to destroy our family and take half of everything I'd built to fund her new life with another man's child. The depth of the deception was staggering. Trevor remained oblivious, excitedly planning for his new sibling and working on the nursery. Watching his innocent enthusiasm was torture for me, but it also strengthened my resolve. Trevor deserved better than a mother who could lie so thoroughly and a stepfather who was equally dishonest. During this week of investigation, Angela grew increasingly nervous. She could sense my emotional distance, but seemed to believe she could maintain the charade. She even had the audacity to ask me about paint colors for the nursery, playing the role of devoted wife while continuing to meet Marcos twice weekly. My respect for my wife evaporated completely as I watched her perform this elaborate deception. The woman I loved was revealed to be a skilled manipulator who could look me in the eyes and lie without hesitation. It was a side of Angela I'd never seen, and it disgusted me more than the affair itself. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the ultrasound revelation, I made my decision. I would not confront Angela yet. That would only force her and Marcos to become more careful or flee. Instead, I would execute a plan that would expose their betrayal publicly while ensuring they faced consequences far beyond a simple divorce settlement. As I sat in my office reviewing Paul's latest report, I felt something I hadn't experienced since building my first house, the satisfaction of a perfectly planned project about to come to fruition. Angela and Marcos had made the mistake of underestimating a man who'd built an empire through patience, intelligence, and unwavering determination. They were about to learn that Jared Atkinson was not the simple small-town contractor they'd assumed he was. He was a man with resources, connections, and most importantly, the ruthless focus to ensure that those who betrayed him would regret it for the rest of their lives. The hunting season was about to begin, and Jared Atkinson had never missed his target. 2 weeks after the ultrasound revelation, I was ready to spring my trap. I'd spent every moment planning meticulously, using the same attention to detail that had made Atkinson Construction the most successful building company in the region. But this time, instead of creating something, I was preparing to systematically destroy the lives of those who betrayed me. The key to my plan was information Paul Hines had uncovered about Marcos's business practices. Jennings Development Group was heavily leveraged, with several projects dependent on continued investor confidence. More importantly, Marcos had been cutting corners on environmental regulations and safety standards, violations that could result in criminal charges if properly documented and reported. My first move was strategic and seemingly innocent. I arranged a business meeting with Marcos under the pretense of discussing a potential partnership. Atkinson Construction's reputation in the region made us an attractive partner for any developer, and Marcos eagerly agreed to meet. We met at the Cedar Falls Country Club, a place where I held considerable influence as a founding member. Marcos arrived in his BMW, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. The man exuded arrogance, clearly believing he was about to close a lucrative deal with a simple small-town contractor. "Jared, I've heard incredible things about your company," Marcos said, extending his hand with a practiced smile. "I think we could do great things together." I shook his hand, noting the soft palm that had never held a hammer or earned an honest callus. "I'm always interested in working with ambitious developers. Tell me about your current projects." Over lunch, Marcos enthusiastically described his various developments, inadvertently revealing details about cost-cutting measures and regulatory shortcuts that I mentally catalogued. The man was so confident in his own cleverness that he essentially confessed to numerous violations without realizing it. "I found that sometimes you have to be creative with regulations," Marcos said with a conspiratorial wink. "Environmental impact studies can be interpreted flexibly if you know the right people." I nodded thoughtfully, secretly recording the conversation on my phone. "That's very interesting. I'd love to see some of your sites firsthand." We arranged for me to visit 3 of Marcos's current projects over the following week. What Marcos didn't know was that I was documenting everything: safety violations, environmental damage, zoning violations, and evidence of bribery. Each site visit provided more ammunition for the eventual legal destruction of Jennings Development Group. Meanwhile, Angela's behavior became increasingly erratic. She'd missed her appointment with Dr. Harrington the previous week, claiming she wasn't feeling well. In reality, she was panicking about the timeline discrepancy and had been researching ways to explain it away. She'd even considered claiming the baby was premature, but the ultrasound measurements made that impossible. Her affair with Marcos continued, but their meetings were now filled with anxiety rather than passion. Angela sensed that I knew something, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed. Marcos dismissed her concerns, confident that his charm and her husband's trusting nature would protect them. During this time, I also began securing my assets. Working with my attorney, Jeffrey Dunn, I restructured Atkinson Construction to protect the company from any potential divorce settlement. Jeffrey was an old friend who'd helped me build my business empire, and he asked no questions when I requested aggressive asset protection strategies. Jared, if you're concerned about liability issues, we can create a more complex corporate structure, Jeffrey suggested during one of our meetings. Do it, I replied. I want everything protected. The house, the business, Trevor's college fund. Everything. Trevor remained a bright spot in my increasingly dark world. The boy continued working on the nursery, painting cartoon characters with the same precision his father applied to construction projects. Watching his innocent excitement was both heartbreaking and motivating for me. Trevor deserved protection from the chaos that was about to erupt. On Thursday evening, Paul Hines delivered the final piece of evidence I needed. Through careful surveillance and strategic information gathering, Paul had discovered that Marcos was planning to leave his wife Samantha within the next month. The plan was for Angela to file for divorce immediately after, claiming irreconcilable differences, and then move to the state capital with the baby once it was born. They've got it all figured out, Paul reported. Marcos has already put a deposit on a penthouse apartment downtown. Angela's been researching divorce attorneys who specialize in high-asset cases. They think they're going to walk away with half of everything you built. I smiled coldly as I reviewed the surveillance photos showing Angela and Marcos at the Grandview Hotel earlier that week. They're about to learn that some plans don't survive contact with reality. That night, as Angela slept beside me, I finalized my strategy. I would reveal my knowledge of the affair in a way that would maximize damage to both betrayers while protecting myself and Trevor. The timing would be crucial. I needed to coordinate multiple moving parts to ensure neither Angela nor Marcos could escape the consequences of their actions. Phase 1 had been intelligence gathering. Phase 2 had been evidence collection and asset protection. Phase 3, which would begin the following Monday, was total war. And Jared Atkinson had never lost a war he'd chosen to fight. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for October, as if the universe itself was conspiring to make this a perfect day for destruction. I woke before dawn, as I had every morning for the past 3 weeks. But today felt different. Today, the planning phase ended and the execution phase began. At 7 a.m., I contacted the State Environmental Protection Agency and reported the violations I documented at Marcos's construction sites. The evidence was comprehensive: photographs, recorded conversations, and documentation of illegal dumping and safety violations that put both workers and the public at risk. My second call was to the Internal Revenue Service. Marcos had been bragging about tax strategies that crossed the line into fraud, and I had carefully documented every detail. The IRS took such reports seriously, especially when accompanied by substantial evidence. The third call was to Samantha Jennings, Marcos's unsuspecting wife. I had debated this decision, but ultimately decided she deserved to know the truth about her husband's double life. Mrs. Jennings, my name is Jared Atkinson. I have information about your husband that you need to know. Could we meet for coffee this morning? Samantha's voice was cautious but curious. I'm not sure what this is about, Mr. Atkinson. Your husband is having an affair with my wife, and they're planning to leave their families. I have extensive documentation, and I thought you should see it before making any decisions about your future. The silence on the other end lasted nearly 30 seconds before Samantha spoke again. What kind of documentation? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near Samantha's law office. I brought copies of everything: surveillance photos, hotel receipts, text messages Paul had obtained, and the ultrasound that proved Angela was carrying Marcos's child. Samantha Jennings was an impressive woman. Intelligent, composed, and clearly devastated by the evidence, but determined to handle the situation professionally. As a family law attorney, she understood the implications immediately. This is comprehensive, she said, reviewing the documents. You've essentially built an airtight case against both of them. That was the intention, I replied. Your husband has been planning to leave you for my wife. They think they're going to take half of everything I've built to fund their new life together. Samantha's eyes hardened. Not if I file first. Marcos doesn't know that I've been documenting his suspicious behavior for months. Combined with your evidence. They spent the next hour coordinating their strategies. Samantha would file for divorce that afternoon, seeking full custody of their daughters and requesting a forensic accounting of all Marcos's business dealings. Her legal connections would ensure the process moved quickly and aggressively. Meanwhile, Angela was at Dr. Harrington's office for a rescheduled appointment. She couldn't avoid it any longer. The doctor had insisted on seeing her after she'd missed the previous week's visit. She sat nervously in the waiting room, unaware that her world was already beginning to collapse around her. At noon, I returned home to find Angela in the kitchen, preparing lunch with nervous energy. She looked up as I entered, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How was your morning?" she asked, her voice artificially bright. "Productive," I replied, setting my briefcase on the counter. "We need to talk." Something in my tone made Angela freeze. She'd been dreading this conversation for weeks, but had hoped she could maintain the charade until the baby was born and she could execute her escape plan with Marcos. "What about?" she asked, though she already knew. I opened my briefcase and removed a manila folder. I spread its contents across the kitchen table: surveillance photos, hotel receipts, ultrasound images, and documented evidence of Angela's affair. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Angela's face went white as she stared at the photographs of herself and Marcos at the Grand View Hotel. "Jared, I can explain." "No," I said quietly. "You can't. Because there is no explanation that justifies what you've done to our family." I sat down across from her, my voice remaining calm and controlled. "I know about Marcos Jennings. I know about your weekly meetings at the Grand View Hotel. I know that the baby you're carrying is his, not mine. And I know about your plan to divorce me and move to the state capital with my money." Angela began crying, but I felt no sympathy. The woman sitting across from me was a stranger who'd systematically destroyed 15 years of marriage and trust. "I also know," I continued, "that you've been planning this for months. The hotel receipts go back to January, when I was in Denver closing the biggest deal of my career. While I was working 18-hour days to secure our future, you were planning to destroy it." "Jared, please." Angela sobbed. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I replied. "But here's what you don't know. As of this morning, Marcos Jennings is facing federal environmental violations charges, IRS fraud investigations, and a divorce filing from his wife, who now has all the evidence of his affair. His business will be destroyed, his assets frozen, and his reputation ruined." Angela's crying stopped as the implications hit her. "What did you do?" "I protected my family and ensured that the people who betrayed us faced appropriate consequences," I said. "Marcos won't be taking care of you or your baby. He'll be lucky if he's not in federal prison." As if on cue, Angela's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcos, *emergency. "Need to talk immediately. Everything's falling apart, *. I watched my wife read the message, seeing the exact moment when she realized that her carefully planned escape route had been completely eliminated. The man she betrayed her family for was about to become a liability rather than a salvation. "Pack your things," I said, standing up. "You have until Trevor gets home from school to leave this house. After that, all communication goes through attorneys." Angela looked up at me with desperate eyes. "What about the baby? What about our family?" "This isn't our family anymore," I replied. "And that isn't my child. You made your choices, Angela. Now you get to live with the consequences." As I walked toward my office to make another round of calls, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The planning was over. The truth was revealed, and justice was being served. Phase 3 had begun, and it was proceeding exactly as designed. Within 24 hours of my revelation, the carefully constructed lies that had held Angela and Marcos's affair together crumbled like a house built on a foundation of sand. The speed and thoroughness of the collapse exceeded even my expectations, proving that dishonest people rarely limit their deception to just one area of their lives. Marcos Jennings received the first blow Tuesday morning when federal agents arrived at his office with search warrants related to the environmental violations I'd reported. The agents seized computers, files, and financial records dating back 3 years. By noon, the story had broken in the state capital's business journal, with headlines reading, "Developer faces federal environmental charges." The second blow came that afternoon when Samantha Jennings filed for divorce, accompanied by a motion for emergency asset freezing based on evidence of marital infidelity and financial irregularities. Her filing included my surveillance evidence and additional documentation she'd gathered independently, painting a picture of a man who'd systematically deceived both his family and his business partners. Angela, meanwhile, had spent Monday night at a hotel, calling Marcos repeatedly as she watched their perfect plan disintegrate. When she finally reached him Tuesday evening, the man who'd promised her a life of luxury and sophistication was barely holding himself together. "Everything's ruined," Marcos said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "The Fed seized everything. Samantha's frozen all our accounts. My investors are backing out. I don't know how this happened so fast." "Jared happened," Angela replied bitterly. "He knew everything. He's been planning this for weeks." "What do you mean he knew everything?" Angela explained the ultrasound revelation and my methodical investigation. As she spoke, Marcos realized the scope of the trap that had been set for them. The simple contractor he dismissed as an easy mark had orchestrated their destruction with a precision that would have impressed a military strategist. "We need to figure this out," Marcos said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe we can." "There is no we anymore," Angela interrupted. "You're about to lose everything, and I'm pregnant with your child. How exactly are you going to take care of us now?" The conversation ended with Marcos hanging up, leaving Angela alone in a hotel room, surrounded by the wreckage of her choices. The man she'd betrayed her family for had revealed himself to be exactly what I had always been, but in reverse. Where I was reliable, Marcos was weak. Where I was principled, Marcos was selfish. Where I fought for my family, Marcos abandoned his responsibilities at the first sign of trouble. Wednesday brought more devastating news for both betrayers. The IRS announced a full audit of Jennings Development Group, with potential criminal charges pending. 3 major investors pulled out of Marcos's projects, citing reputational concerns. His business lawyer informed him that the company would likely be forced into bankruptcy within 60 days. For Angela, the reality of her situation became increasingly clear. Her sister Muriel refused to let her stay at her house, disgusted by Angela's betrayal of me and Trevor. Her parents, the once proud Moody family, were mortified by the scandal and offered only cold disapproval rather than support. Chuck Lake, meanwhile, proved his loyalty to me by ensuring that word of Angela's affair spread through Cedar Falls' tight-knit business community with surgical precision. By Wednesday evening, everyone who mattered knew exactly what had happened and where the blame lay. Public opinion was overwhelmingly supportive of me and contemptuous of Angela's betrayal. Trevor handled the news with the same maturity he applied to everything else, though I could see the pain in his eyes. "Is Mom ever coming home?" the boy asked Wednesday night as we worked on a new project in the garage, building a bookshelf for Trevor's room to replace the nursery decorations he'd removed himself. "No," I replied honestly. "But we're going to be fine. We've always been a good team, and that's not going to change." "I'm sorry about the baby," Trevor said quietly. "I was really excited about being a big brother." I put down my tools and looked at my son, the one part of my marriage that had been genuine and valuable. "You're going to be a great big brother someday, when the time is right. This isn't about you, Trevor. You did nothing wrong." Thursday brought the final domino in my carefully orchestrated campaign. Paul Hines delivered evidence that Marcos had been embezzling from his own company to fund his affair with Angela. The expensive hotel suite, the gifts, even Angela's shopping sprees had been paid for with money stolen from investors and business partners. The embezzlement evidence was the final nail in Marcos's professional coffin. Within hours of its delivery to federal investigators, warrants were issued for his arrest. He was picked up Thursday evening at his office, led away in handcuffs as local news cameras captured every moment of his humiliation. Angela watched the arrest on the local news from her hotel room, her hand resting on her growing belly as she realized the full scope of what her choices had caused. The man she'd betrayed her family for wasn't just unfaithful and weak, he was a criminal who'd used her as an unwitting accomplice in his schemes. Friday evening, exactly 1 week after I'd confronted Angela with the evidence of her betrayal, I sat in my office reviewing the results of my campaign. Marcos Jennings was in federal custody, facing charges that would likely result in a decade in prison. His business was bankrupt, his assets seized, and his reputation destroyed beyond repair. Angela was alone, pregnant, and facing a divorce settlement that would leave her with minimal assets thanks to the prenuptial agreement she'd forgotten about, and the adultery clause that voided most of her financial protections. Her family had disowned her, her friends had abandoned her, and the man she'd betrayed her family for was headed to prison. As I closed the files on my desk, I felt the satisfaction of a job completed successfully. The planning had been meticulous, the execution flawless, and the results comprehensive. The people who had betrayed me were facing consequences proportionate to their actions, while Trevor and I were free to rebuild our lives on a foundation of truth rather than lies. Phase 3 was complete. It was time to begin Phase 4, building something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. 3 months had passed since that ultrasound revelation, and Cedar Falls had settled into a new normal that reflected the consequences of choices made and justice served. Winter had arrived early, blanketing the town in snow that seemed to cleanse the air of the scandal that had dominated local conversations through the fall. Marcos Jennings was serving a 7-year federal sentence for embezzlement and environmental crimes. The prosecution had been swift and merciless, with the evidence I provided forming the backbone of a case that left no room for plea bargaining. The man who had once strutted around in expensive suits now wore prison orange and had aged 10 years in 3 months. His twin daughters lived with their mother, who had successfully claimed most of his remaining assets and moved them to a different state to escape the scandal. Angela had given birth to a daughter in December, a beautiful baby girl she named Cora. The birth had been difficult, both physically and emotionally, as she faced motherhood alone in a small apartment across town, supported only by welfare and the minimal alimony the court had awarded given her adultery. The once proud mayor's daughter now worked part-time at a grocery store, struggling to make ends meet while caring for an infant whose father would be in prison until she was school-aged. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in Cedar Falls that Angela, who dreamed of escaping to a life of luxury and sophistication, had instead found herself trapped in the kind of poverty she'd always looked down upon. Her family had slowly begun speaking to her again, but their relationships remained strained and conditional. The moody name, once prestigious in Cedar Falls, was now associated with scandal and poor judgment. I, meanwhile, had thrived in ways that surprised even me. The divorce had been finalized in January, with Angela receiving far less than she expected thanks to the prenuptial agreement and the evidence of her infidelity. Atkinson Construction had landed 2 major contracts in the aftermath of the scandal, as clients appreciated my integrity and the way I'd handled my personal crisis with dignity. Trevor had adjusted to our new life with remarkable resilience. The boy had initially struggled with anger toward his mother, but I'd worked carefully to help my son process the betrayal without letting it poison his view of all relationships. We'd grown even closer, spending evenings working on projects and weekends exploring hiking trails around Cedar Falls. "Dad," Trevor said one Saturday morning as we worked on rebuilding the deck behind our house. "Do you think you'll ever get married again?" I paused my hammering and considered the question. At 40, I felt older and wiser, but not bitter. The betrayal had taught me the value of careful judgment, but it hadn't destroyed my capacity for trust. It had simply made me more selective about who earned it. "Maybe someday," I replied honestly. "But not until you and I have finished building our new life together. We're a pretty good team as we are." Chuck Lake had become an even closer friend through the crisis, his loyalty during the darkest period cementing a bond that went beyond business partnership. His wife Sarah had taken on something of a protective role toward Trevor, ensuring the boy felt supported by our broader community, even as his nuclear family had been shattered. The reconstruction of my personal life paralleled my approach to construction projects, methodical, patient, and built to last. I joined the school board, becoming an advocate for programs that supported children from broken homes. I'd started a scholarship fund in Trevor's name, helping local students afford trade school or college. Dr. Harrington had retired in December, selling his practice to a younger physician, but remaining in Cedar Falls. He occasionally joined me for coffee, and our conversations often touched on the ethical challenges of truth-telling and the unexpected ways that honesty could lead to justice. "You did the right thing," the old doctor had said during one of our conversations. "It took courage to tell you the truth, but it would have been worse for everyone if I'd stayed silent." "Including Angela," I had replied. Living a lie was destroying her, even if she couldn't see it. The truth gave her a chance to face reality, and maybe become a better person. By spring, Angela had indeed begun showing signs of personal growth, though it came at a tremendous cost. She worked hard at her job, cared devotedly for Cora, and had begun attending counseling sessions to understand how she'd made such destructive choices. She occasionally saw me around town. Cedar Falls was too small to avoid each other completely, but our interactions were brief and polite. The anger had faded, replaced by something closer to pity on my part, and regret on hers. We'd both moved beyond the hatred and hurt to a place where we could coexist peacefully while living entirely separate lives. Trevor had asked to meet his half-sister, and after careful consideration, I'd arranged supervised visits. The boy was curious about Cora, but clear that Angela's choices had consequences that affected their relationship permanently. He was polite, but distant during visits, protective of his loyalty to his father, while maintaining basic human decency toward his mother. As spring turned to summer, I reflected on the year that had changed everything. The betrayal had initially felt like the end of the world, but it had actually been the end of a lie that had been slowly poisoning my life for years. The truth had been devastating, but ultimately liberating, allowing me to build something authentic and lasting. Standing on my rebuilt deck one evening, watching Trevor practice baseball in the backyard, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete contentment with my life as it actually was, rather than as I'd imagined it to be. The foundation was solid now, built on truth, integrity, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son who'd survived the worst together and emerged stronger. 2 years after that ultrasound revealed the truth, Cedar Falls had fully absorbed the lessons of the Angela Atkinson scandal, and the town had moved on with the collective wisdom that comes from witnessing justice served comprehensively and fairly. Our story had become something of a local legend, a cautionary tale about the consequences of betrayal and the rewards of integrity. Marcos Jennings remained in federal prison, with 5 years left on his sentence. Reports from his ex-wife Samantha indicated that he'd become a model prisoner, finally facing the reality of his actions and their consequences. His daughters were thriving under their mother's care, having moved across the country, where they could build new lives free from their father's legacy of dishonesty. Angela had continued her slow journey toward redemption. Though it remained a difficult path marked by the consequences of her choices, she'd been promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store, a modest achievement that represented genuine progress in rebuilding her life. Cora was a healthy, happy 2-year-old who brought moments of joy to Angela's otherwise challenging existence. The relationship between Angela and Trevor had evolved into something civil but distant. The boy, now 16 and increasingly mature, visited his mother occasionally, but made it clear that his primary loyalty remained with his father. He'd grown into a young man who embodied my best qualities: integrity, work ethic, and loyalty, while avoiding the bitterness that might have consumed someone who'd experienced such family trauma at a younger age. She made her choices, Trevor had said to me one evening as we discussed whether to attend Angela's graduation from a community college business program. I can respect that she's trying to do better, without forgetting what she put us through. We attended the graduation ceremony, sitting in the back and leaving immediately afterward. Angela had looked across the auditorium and nodded in acknowledgement, understanding that our presence represented a form of closure rather than reconciliation. She was grateful for our witness to her small achievement, even knowing that the damage to their relationship could never be fully repaired. I had found love again, though I'd approached it with the careful deliberation that now characterized all my major decisions. Pearl Downing was a widow who'd moved to Cedar Falls to be closer to her adult children. She was kind, intelligent, and shared my values of honesty and hard work. Our relationship had developed slowly over 18 months, with both of us understanding the importance of building something genuine rather than rushing into commitment. Trevor approved of Pearl, appreciating her respect for his relationship with me, and her understanding that she wasn't trying to replace his mother, but rather to add something positive to our lives. The three of us had formed a comfortable family unit that honored the past while building toward the future. Atkinson Construction had grown dramatically, expanding into 3 states and employing over 400 people. The company's reputation for integrity had become its greatest asset, with clients specifically seeking us out because of my character. The scandal that could have destroyed me had instead become proof of my principles and judgment. Chuck Lake had become a full partner in the business, our friendship deepened by the trials we'd weathered together. Chuck's wife Sarah had developed a close relationship with Pearl, creating a social circle that supported both couples while respecting their individual needs and boundaries. Dr. Harrington, though retired, remained a respected figure in Cedar Falls, often cited as an example of professional integrity who'd chosen truth over comfort when faced with a difficult situation. His courage in revealing Angela's deception had prevented years of additional deception and allowed everyone involved to face reality and make better choices. Paul Hines, the private investigator who'd helped me gather evidence, had become something of a local celebrity, with other betrayed spouses seeking his services based on his thorough and professional work on the Atkinson case. He developed a reputation for discretion and competence that made him the go-to investigator for sensitive family matters throughout the region. On a warm Saturday evening in June, exactly 3 years after the ultrasound revelation, I stood on my deck, the same deck I'd rebuilt during the darkest period of my life, surrounded by the people who'd proven their loyalty and worth. Chuck and Sarah were there with their children. Pearl was helping Trevor prepare for his senior year of high school. Jeffrey Dunn, my attorney, had stopped by with his family for the barbecue that had become an annual celebration of survival and renewal. As I watched this gathering of genuine relationships built on truth and mutual respect, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately saved me from a life built on lies. The pain that had seemed unbearable had led to growth and wisdom I wouldn't have gained any other way. Any regrets? Pearl asked, joining me at the deck railing as the sun set over Cedar Falls. I considered the question seriously, as I did all questions about the past 3 years. About trusting too much initially? No. About how I handled the truth when I learned it? No. About the consequences that followed? No. I looked across the yard where Trevor was showing Chuck's youngest son how to properly swing a baseball bat, the same patient instruction I'd received from my own father decades ago. The cycle of positive influence continued, unbroken by the betrayal that had threatened to poison everything good in my life. The only regret I have, I continued, is that it took a crisis to show me the difference between the life I thought I wanted and the life I actually needed. But even that wasn't really a mistake. It was education. As the evening wound down and our friends departed, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from surviving the worst and building something better from the wreckage. Angela and Marcos had paid the full price for their betrayal, not through revenge, but through the natural consequences of their choices and the justice that follows when truth replaces lies. The foundation was solid now, built on bedrock rather than sand. Whatever the future held, I knew I was ready for it, surrounded by people whose love was genuine and whose loyalty had been tested and proven. Justice had been served, not through hatred or bitterness, but through the simple act of refusing to live a lie and insisting that actions have consequences. In Cedar Falls, the story of Jared Atkinson had become more than local legend. It was proof that integrity, patience, and careful judgment could triumph over deception, betrayal, and selfishness. The man who'd lost everything had gained something more valuable, a life built on truth, surrounded by people worthy of trust, and anchored by the unshakable knowledge that he'd faced the worst and emerged victorious. That ultrasound that had revealed the lie had ultimately delivered the truth that set everyone free. And in the end, that truth had been worth every moment of pain it had caused to uncover.